Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the Litvitational 2, which was one of the best invitationals that we've had in Smash Ultimate. Every single match was just an absolute banger, and we're going to be talking about all of them today. Our top 16 finishers and our only 16 people in the bracket are going to be Aaron, WebJP, Cosmos, and Apollo Kage in 13th, Chuon, Dabuzz, Beastmode Paul, and Peebnut in 9th, Epic Gabriel and Aimo in 7th, Cola and Zomba in 5th, Lima in 4th, Shadik in 3rd, Mia in 2nd, and winning the entire thing, the two-peat, Light. And we're going to be talking about every single player in this video, starting off with one of our 13th place finishers in WebJP. And unfortunately, he was the only player at this tournament that didn't end up taking a set, but he took games in every single set that he played, aside from Light, who was his pool winner. And Light, the guy that won the tournament, is in your pool. That's kind of just a bad draw. He also had Beastmode Paul, who was playing incredibly well, specifically in the pools phase. That guy looked unstoppable. And Apollo Kage, who had a very competitive game 5 set with, absolutely could have gone his way, and it was one of the best sets of the tournament. I highly recommend that you watch it, but he doesn't pick up a set win in the pools phase, and in the main bracket he doesn't get any luckier, drawing Dabuzz. And it's really unfortunate to draw someone from your region at an event like this, but it's kind of happened when the talent is so condensed, and both in practice and in paper, Dabuzz is very good versus WebJP. Sheik Lina is definitely in Rose's favor, and Dabuzz just has a very dominant head-to-head there. But overall, this tournament, I don't think it was bad from WebJP. He's still like very competitive in all of his sets, and even though he didn't end up taking one, I still think that this is an event that he can learn a lot from. You have to remember that WebJP is a very new player to the top level of Smash Ultimate, and I feel like the second this guy gets a top 8 at a major, he is just going to snowball super hard. So I'm excited to see what he does. Our next player is going to be Cosmos, and he manages to get his win in the pools phase over Lima, and I would say that Aegis is favored in that matchup, but it's still very scary because the second you go off stage, Bayo is just going to kill you, but Cosmos managed to navigate around that, ends up winning that set 3-1, and then he has a banger game 5 set versus Cola. Every single time those guys play, it is an absolute show, and this was no exception. He also has a game 4 set versus Mia that, low-key, he should have won. He had one of the hardest strokes I've ever seen in game 3, which was super tragic, and he probably should have won game 1 as well, but it's Mia. That guy is just a very tough player to close out against, so I'm not going to hold it against him too much. And in the main bracket, he has the misfortune of drawing Zoma. Now, historically, Cosmos has actually been pretty good versus Zoma, but in their more recent encounters, Zoma has been winning it more and more, and also that guy is coming off his win at Genesis, so he was playing pretty well at this event, even though his pools phase didn't go super well, and we'll get to that when we get to him. But overall, Rob Aegis definitely in Aegis' favor, but Zoma is incredible at that matchup. He's beaten other world-class players like Chuon in it, so not a big deal for Cosmos. I thought he looked really good at this event, and he looked even better at Cirque, so maybe a bit of a resurgence from this player. We'll have to see. Next up is Apollo Kage, and he's going to be from that WebJP group, and I've said it before in this video, and I'll say it again later on in the video. You need to watch the sets from this tournament, but if you can only watch a couple, watch the Apollo Kage sets from his pools phase, because oh my lord, they were good. I already mentioned that WebJP said he also has a reverse 3-0 versus Beastmode Paul, which was just ludicrous, and I think Hero does pretty well versus Snake, so for him to be able to pull that off was incredible. And he does end up losing his run back to Light from Watch the Throne, so Light gets his revenge, winning 3-1, but Apollo Kage still definitely could have won that set, and even though he ends up winning 2 sets, he still falls to the loser side of the bracket simply just because his game count wasn't as strong as Light and Beastmode Paul. Light has an 8-4, Beastmode Paul has an 8-6, and Apollo Kage has a 7-7, so he drops to the loser side, where he would unfortunately run into Epic Gabriel, who was just on a monstrous one once he actually got into the main bracket. And again, I'll talk about that when we talk about Gabe's run, but overall from Apollo Kage, he still looked really solid at this event. He was able to get a couple nice wins, and he's still definitely the best Snake player in America, even though MVD has been getting a lot better, and I'll talk about that another time. But AK, he's had a couple lower placements here and there, but I think it's a similar situation to WebJP, where the second he gets a higher placement, maybe a top 8 and a major, maybe even a top 4 in a major, because I do think AK can go that far in a bracket at his current state of play, it's just going to snowball super hard, and he's going to be one of the best, even though he already is. And our final 13th place finisher is going to be Aaron, and he was in a similar situation to Apollo Kage, where he ends up winning 2 games in the pools phase, but his game count just wasn't good enough. He ends up winning a game 5 set versus Aimo and a game 4 set versus Zomba, which is crazy. Huge props to him for that one, especially considering how good Zoma's record has been versus Tweak recently, and I really think that just once again solidifies the point that everyone really agrees on, but that Aaron and Tweak have such different styles of Diddy Kong, and both are extremely viable in the meta. That's one of the reasons that Diddy is such a good character, because you can play him at a multitude of places with so many different game plans, and whatever game plan Aaron had versus Zoma, it clearly worked out because he sent the Genesis champs to losers, or he was one of the players that sent them to losers. But ultimately, it was Peanut 3-0ing Aaron that made his game count just not good enough. He had a 6-6 game count versus Aimo's 8-5 and Peanut's 7-4, so he ends up going to the losers side, and in the losers bracket, he ends up running into Lima, and he has an extremely competitive game 5 set there, but ultimately Lima comes out on top. And I think this tournament is very telling of how good Aaron is at this game. Even if he really doesn't show up at many events, he didn't look amazing at Cirque. When he's playing at his best, he can beat some of the best players in the entire world, and I just hope we get to see more of him. Next up is going to be our 9th place finisher, starting off with the Buzz, and he ends up getting 3rd in his pool. He 3-0s Epic Gabriel, but then he himself gets 3-0'd by Chuon, and we did expect Chuon to win that one, though maybe not so decisive. I just think Aegis is a really difficult character for DeBuzz's lineup, and I'm curious to see who he ends up going with in the future. I feel like it's probably just going to be Rosalina, because that just seems to be his go-to. It's the character he's the best at, and it's also the character that he's clearly willing to invest the time into, and that's ultimately what matters at the top level of Smash Ultimate, because of how much time these guys are actually putting into their character. But I would love to see DeBuzz fully investing into the Min Min, because one, I know he'd be cracked with that character, but two, Min Min is just so unbelievably broken. I feel like that character is still extremely unoptimized, and a player like DeBuzz constantly pushing her meta would definitely help her out a lot. But I would also like DeBuzz to play Sig. This isn't about the Aegis topic anymore. I'm just talking about characters I think DeBuzz would be good at, and regardless of who he chooses, I think he can find a solution. But as it stands right now, it just looked like the Aegis gave him a really tough time, so I'm curious to see how he would do in the run back versus Chuon, and versus Shadik, who he's usually very good versus. I feel like it was more of a Shadik just playing amazing this weekend that DeBuzz playing bad, because, you know, he gets 3rd at this event and he wins the main event, so just shouts to Shadik, I guess. And in the main bracket, you're going to have DeBuzz beating WebJP, like I already mentioned, and then he ends up losing to Aimo. And I think this was just a situation where Aimo was a lot more comfortable in the match. He has a lot of Rosalina experience in Japan, especially in contrast to everyone else in the world, and Ryu isn't a super common character, and there's no Ryu players even close to Aimo's level, and he plays the game way differently than a lot of Ryus do as well. He's a lot more aerial based, and the way he uses Nair specifically is just so strong that I feel like DeBuzz wasn't ready for it. And it always seems like DeBuzz is getting 9th place at these invitationals, but then he went on and farmed at Cirque, getting 3rd place there, so whatever, the invitational doesn't even count. Next up is going to be Chuon, and as I literally just mentioned, he ends up 3-0ing DeBuzz in the pools phase, as well as 3-0ing Epic Gabriel, but he ultimately falls to Shadik in a 3-1 fashion, though he still manages to get out in the winner's side. His first draw in winner's quarters is going to be up versus Light, who on paper he matches very well into, having a 5-1 record prior to this, but Light looked really good in that set. A lot of the games were still extremely close, but it was a 3-0 in Light's favor, and in the loser side, you end up running into Lima, who just had a monster losers run, and still goes game 5, but into Lima's favor, and I believe the entire set was Olimar versus Bayonetta. Even though I do think that Aegis does well versus Bayo, I do think that Olimar is the better choice, and that's twice now that Chuon has ended up losing to top-level Bayo players. He loses to Tama P at Delta, now he loses to Lima at Litvitational, and it's not that big of a deal. Both those guys are arguably top 30 in the world, maybe Tama P not as much so, but I like to call him that because he's just incredible. But back to the topic at hand, I think that is a matchup that Chuon is going to have to work on, and it's not like his characters do bad, and I actually think his characters do quite well in it, so I'm curious to see how he adapts that, and I know he's going to be able to overcome it, but I just want to see what he does. Next up is going to be Peanut, and he's actually going to be our LCQ winner, so he wasn't even supposed to be in this bracket, and he was arguably the star of the show this week. It's between him and Shadik. They were just both so exceptional, but back to Peanut. He had a pretty difficult group with Aimo, Aaron, Zoma, and he managed to come out as the first seed. He only ends up dropping a set to Aimo 3-1, but he 3-0s Aaron, and he 3-1 Zoma, the Genesis champ, to get out through the winner's side as the first seed of the entire tournament, where then he ends up fighting Cola, and he loses that one in a game 4. I think Roy does really well versus Mega Man. It's just super difficult for him to actually create that space that he's normally so good at, and in the loser side, you actually have Epic Gabriel beating Peanut, despite Peanut beating Zomba, so shouts to Epic Gabriel for just being really good at that matchup, because that is definitely a matchup that Mega Man wins in, so I guess just big ups to Epic Gabriel. He's really good in it, but overall, Peanut was exceptional this weekend, and I think a lot of people are going to have this guy on their radar, and specifically more so for what he did at Cirque to CFL, where he beat players like Mia and Chuon and Zomba again. He beat Zomba twice this weekend, and overall was just incredible, putting Mega Man back on the map, and I really appreciate that. And our final 9th place finisher is going to be Beastmode Paul. I already mentioned his sets versus Apollo Kage and WebJP. Loses very competitively to Game 5 Apollo Kage and ends up beating WebJP in a Game 4. So how did his set versus Light go? Well, my dear viewer, he beats Light, a top 10 player in the world who ended up winning the tournament, and not only does he beat Light, he does so in a reverse 3-0 fashion. Goat Mode Paul comes out, and unfortunately, he was not able to recapture that magic in the main bracket. It's not like he played bad in the main bracket, and honestly, his opponents were pretty bad draws. He ends up getting Shadik in the winner's side, which is like really my reward for reverse throwing Light is getting Shadik, and historically, Shadik's been very good in that matchup, and I also think Chuon just does pretty well versus Hero, and he ends up losing that one 3-0, and in the loser side, he ends up getting Zoma, manages to take it to game 5, but Zoma ultimately comes out on top, and it feels like Beastmode Paul is so close to one of these major top 8s, and as I've already said multiple times in this video, the second a player gets their first top 8 at a major, they just get significantly better. It feels like a mental barrier is broken. We've seen it from Shadik, we are gonna see it from WebJP, and I think we're gonna see it from Beastmode Paul as well. Also, I should point out that Sephiroth was the choice for Beastmode Paul versus Zomba, which is kind of crazy. I'm not saying Hero would be a better choice. I actually think Hero doesn't do super well versus Rob, but it just shows how fundamentally solid Beastmode Paul is in this game. To be able to take a player of Zomba's caliber to Game 5 with Sephiroth, that mid-tier, it's pretty impressive. On to our top 8 finishers, starting off with Epic Gabriel, who I was very impressed by at this tournament. It didn't start off super well for him. He had a pretty tough pulls phase with the Buzz, Chuon, and Shadik, and he ends up getting 3-0'd by every single one of those players, and that's respectable. I wouldn't do much better, but in the main bracket, he just turned on the boosters, 3-0'ing Apollo Kage, and more impressively, beating Peanut in a game 5, as I kind of talked about earlier. That matchup is really difficult for Rob, but he still managed to overcome it, and once in the top 8, he ends up falling to Zomba in a game 4 set, but he low-key almost made the craziest comeback I've ever seen in that game 4. He was one hit away from reverse 3-stalking Zomba, the best Rob player in the entire world. So I think Epic Gabriel definitely cemented himself as one of the best Robs in America, one of the best Robs in the entire world. I would definitely put him in that top 5. I hope we get to see this guy travel more because he really is incredible. We saw a lot of that in the online era, and we just haven't seen him at too many big major events. So hopefully we will one day, and I know he's going to farm if he shows up. Next up is going to be Aimo, the other 7th place finisher, and we kind of basically already touched on his pulls phase. He loses a game 5 to Aaron, but he ends up beating both Pigment and Zomba 3-1, and if you've noticed at this point, Zomba has gone 0-3 in his pool, but we'll talk about that when we talk about Zomba. And Aimo manages to grab the 2nd seed, where he has the misfortune of running into Mia, and I'll save you the time of looking at that record. It is not very good for Aimo. He has only won 1 set, and that took place at Altcore, and unfortunately, this was not an exception to the rule. Manages to take a game, but get sent to the losers bracket. I already talked about his set versus DeBuzz, but overall, he just seemed more comfortable in the Rosalina matchup than DeBuzz did in the Ryu matchup, and he ends up losing 3-0 to Lima, and I think Ryu does not do very well versus Bayonetta. She just breaks focus like it's nothing. Like, she literally, every single move she has pretty much is going to be breaking focus, and she's very easily able to play around Ryu's projectile, and you take away focus, you take away Ryu's fireball, all of a sudden, the character isn't that good anymore, and I'm sure Aimo is going to develop counterplay in the Bayonetta matchup because that's just a very prevalent matchup that you need to be good at nowadays, but as it stands right now, Lima definitely kind of handled him in that one. On to our 5th place finisher, starting off with Cola, and he was probably the biggest wildcard coming into this event, and suffice to say, he did not disappoint. In the pools phase, he ends up losing 3-1 to Mia, but he 3-0s Lima, and he 3-2s Cosmos to get to the main bracket through the winner's side, and in the winner's side, his first opponent is going to be up versus Peepna, and like I already mentioned, he ends up winning that one a 4-1. Then he runs into Shadik, and he has a super close game 5 set, just like the one at Santa Paws, but just like the one at Santa Paws, Shadik ends up coming out on top in the game 5, and in the loser side, Lima gets his sweep revenge where he camps Cola so hard. I thought it was personally very funny, and I also have no idea how to deal with it, and Cola didn't either that time around, but he looked very good at this event. It was pretty much all Roy, though we did see a bit of a hint from the Aegis. Now, I don't know if that's a character he's actually going to invest into. I don't think it would be a terrible idea, but Cola's Roy is just so much better than every other Roy player in the world that I wouldn't mind him fully investing into that character. Just the way he plays, the aggression, and how fast he is really overwhelming, and most people in this game can't deal with it, and I'm curious to see which characters he picks going into his next couple majors. And our other 5th place finisher is going to be Zomba, and I don't know how to feel about this weekend for him. He was the first seed of both Cirque du CFL and Litvitational, which makes sense. He just won Genesis, and he ends up getting 5th place at both events, which isn't terrible. It's actually really good, but for the first seed of the event, the Genesis winner, I would say it is a slight underperformance, and straight up, he had a drastic pools phase. He ends up losing 3-1 to Peanut, Aaron, and Aimo, and at that point, I thought Zoma had taken the monkey paw. You win Genesis, but you lose every other set in 2024. I thought his career was over, but he cleared that up in the loser side, obviously. He 3-1s Cosmos, Game 5's Beastmode Paul, and 3-1s Epic Gabriel in the Rob Ditto before falling to Light in a very competitive Game 5 set, and you should always watch Light Zoma sets. I shouldn't have to tell you that one. So overall this weekend for Zoma, I really don't know how to feel about it. He still got 5th place at 2 major events. He still looked really solid. He does have a couple losses on his repertoire that you wouldn't expect, but it's not like he did bad at anything, so overall, just good job. Our 4th place finisher is going to be Lima, and like Zoma, he got swept in the pools phase. Has a very competitive Game 5 set versus Mia, but he ends up losing that one. And then he gets 3-0'd by Cola, and he loses Game 4 to Cosmos. But in the main bracket, something just clicked, and I think it's because he started camping people. He 3-2's Aaron, 3-2's Chuon, 3-0's Aimo, and 3-0's Cola. And you gotta watch that Cola set. You can watch it at 2 times speed because a majority of it is just Lima camping him off stage, which I love, and I'm not even gonna lie, that is what optimal Bayo looks like. And Lima plays optimal Bayo, at least the closest that we have to it in Smash Ultimate. I think the way that he plays this character in the neutral isn't objectively correct because there's no correct way to play things, but I think it's the closest that we have right now. His damage output is some of the best in the entire game, only rivaled by the other guys up there like Tama P and Bloom Forever, and they all have specific things that they're very good at, but Lima is by far the best camping Bayo in the entire world, and she happens to be a very good camping character, and he does end up losing to Light 4-1, or rather 3-1, and to be fair, it is really hard to camp Light. I'm sure he tried, but the lasers from Light were just incredible. I'll talk about that a little bit more when I talk about Light, but overall, Lima in this main bracket absolutely tore it up, and he's one of the best Bayo players, if not the best Bayo player in the entire world. And we've arrived at our podium finisher, starting off with Shadik in 3rd place, and he was the star of this weekend. I know I said it was between him and Pimna, and Pimna definitely has a shout, but a top 3 from Shadik and a win at Cirque, I feel like definitely cements him that title, getting his first major win ever, and there's going to be a lot more to come from this guy. He ends up sweeping his pools phase, 3-0ing Epic Gabriel, beating Chuon in a 3-1, and beating Dabuz in a Game 5, and I just want to hit you with some hard-hitting stats. He has played 4 sets versus Dabuz before, and he's lost every single one. It was 0-2 for Dabuz, then 0-3 for Dabuz, then 1-3 for Dabuz, then 2-3 for Dabuz. So naturally, the numbers would say that Shadik wins this in a Game 5, and the numbers for once were actually right. He ends up beating Dabuz for the first time ever, and he also beats him in the main bracket of Cirque as well. Once he gets into the main bracket of the Litvitational, though, he ends up 3-0ing Beastmode Paul, beating Cola in a Game 5 set. Then he loses a super competitive Game 5 to Mia that he absolutely could have won, and he did win in the main bracket, and he ends up falling to Light in the losers finals, but he also manages to take that to Game 5, even though I think Fox does really well versus Corn. And overall, Shadik was just amazing at this weekend. You don't need me to tell you that he won the main bracket at Cirque to CFL. He was absolutely crazy at the Litvitational, and he's just such a talented player, someone that should be shooting for top 10, and honestly shooting for best in the world. In 2nd place, you're going to have Mia, and straight up, this guy was flexing his top player muscles at this event, bringing out the Mii Sword Fighter versus pretty much everyone, and versus pretty much everyone, it was having great success. He swept his pools phase, 3-1ing both Cosmos and Cola, and then beating Lima in a Game 5 set, and I think this was one of the hardest, if not the hardest pull Mia could have gotten, and he still managed to come out on top with no win, so big ups to him for that. Then in the main bracket, he ends up beating Aimo 3-1, beats Light 3-0, beats Shadik in a Game 5, and in the grand finals, he ends up losing to Light Game 5, and then loses the reset Game 4. But overall, obviously, Mia looks incredible. This guy always looks incredible. Isn't as strong in the main bracket for Cirque, but I want to cycle back to that Mii Sword Fighter because Mia has been showing less interest in the Game Watch. At least that's what I've heard from the grapevine. So if he's looking to kind of shift away from Game Watch, even though he is so indomitable on that character, I think him having a Mii Sword Fighter main and then just secondarying the Steve of the Game Watch, bringing them out when you really need to, he could definitely get away with that and still be a top 10 player in the world with Mii Sword Fighter, who is garbage, by the way. And Mia was showing me some stuff this weekend. I really appreciate it because I don't really know anything about Sword Fighter. Pretty much everything I know about Sword Fighter was from this weekend, and he was doing some pretty crazy stuff. But if Mia wants to fully invest in the Sword Fighter, I have 1000% faith that he can actually make that character work. As long as he keeps the Game Watch and the Steve in the pocket, he's still going to be one of the best players in the world, and I'm very curious to see which route he goes down, and you all know I want it to be the Sword Fighter route, but we'll just have to wait and see. And our final player, the big winner of the Litvitational, is going to be the 2-time champ, Light, and he doesn't do amazing in the main bracket, getting 17th at Cirque, but who cares? He won a major event. He got his big win under his belt, and it started off a little bit shaky with that reverse 3-0 for Beastmode Paul, but in the pools phase, even after losing that, he still manages to get the first seed by beating WebJP 3-0 and beating Apollo Kage 3-1, and prior to this, both those players had beaten him twice at the major level in a row, so that's gotta be feeling really good to get that redemption. And then in the main bracket, as I already mentioned, he 3-0 Chuon, which I was super impressed by. That's a really dominant record for Chuon, and even though a majority of those sets are pre-quarantine, their last encounter was at Crown, where Chuon did end up winning that one, and Light managed to overcome it. Does end up going down to the loser side versus Mia, but once Light's in the loser side, something just switches, because he looked incredible. He 3-2s Zoma, 3-1s Lima. He outcamped Lima, which I didn't even think was possible. His gun usage in that matchup was impeccable, and I think it's something that Light should actually invest in all matches, because the way that he was using it was so incredible, and it definitely helps that Lima just wasn't approaching him at all, but I think it's something that if he mixes in, he's going to have a lot more success with it. Light just slowing down the play. He's usually such a quick player, but if he can mix up his tempo a lot more in these matches, I think he's going to have a lot of success, and I hope that's something that he kind of invests into going into the future. Then he beat Shadik in that game 5, like I mentioned, and in the grand finals, he takes not one, but 2 sets versus Mia. I believe the first game of the grand finals was Sword Fighter versus Fox, and he kind of put that Sword Fighter away, and I don't know what game Mia brought out the Game & Watch specifically in the grand finals, but Light put that Game & Watch away. He looked indomitable in that matchup, and he was already very good at it. We knew that from his set versus Vice or Genesis, but it was like incredible how much better he was, and also every single game that Mia took versus Light was going to be on the Steve, because Steve just does really well versus Fox, but Light is also one of the best players in the entire world versus Steve, and I really feel like he showcased it in those last 2 sets. He was just so patient in his play. He made all of his hits count so much, and he was able to take the dub over Mia twice, a play that he's never beaten before, which is just so impressive. Massive props to Light for getting his first major win of 2024. I'm sure there are plenty more to come, and with that, I thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. The sport has been absolutely unreal as of late. If there's anything I left out, got wrong, or if you just want to say hi, leave a comment down below. Be sure to sub while you're down there, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye!